On this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast, I'm joined by Toki Pona creator Sonja Lang, and we talk about how it is to create a con language and the meaning of life.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Saluton everyone out there, this is Chris Broholm and you're listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. I want to welcome you to a special episode, and today's episode is with Toki Pona creator Sonja Lang. Sonja is a very interesting person and she just released the official Toki Pona book, details of which you can find on actualfluency.com/Toki Pona. So that will redirect you to where you can pick up that book. It's also on Amazon, and I've been promised that it will be on the Kindle marketplace as well soon enough. But before I get into the interview with Sonja, I just wanted to thank everyone for listening and for leaving a comment or for interacting with the show in any sense. I've been receiving a lot of emails about people's comments and feedback, and it's been really, it's just super nice that you guys take the time to do that. It really makes it all worth it. So, shout out to those people. You know who you are, and thank you so much. Even if I didn't respond to you, I'm so sorry if I didn't. But I do read every single message. So if you want to send me an email, it's chris@actualfluency.com. Put whatever you want in there. I love getting emails. Today is episode 20, and you might have thought that, well, that's cause for celebration, isn't it? And you're right. 20 episodes of a podcast is a big cause for celebration. There is a little but, and it might be a big but actually. The problem is that I skipped episode 13, not because I'm particularly superstitious, but because I know that the number has certain negative ramifications in other cultures. So out of respect for them, and sort of just to, I guess, why do it anyway? Why take the risk? There are people who don't like that number. I didn't want the great content of that episode to be missed, so that became episode 14. So technically, this is only episode 19. But for the next episode 21, I do have a special surprise planned, and it's going to be a very exciting episode. It's going to be an interview with kind of the guy who started the whole thing for me, and we're going to get a chance to kind of pick his brain and see what's going on right now. I won't reveal the name now, but you might guess it from context, or maybe if you read my Berlin trip report. But either way, I'm looking forward to next episode. It's episode 20, and I just want to thank you guys for supporting the site. And I also want to just take a moment to give a shout out to one of the partners of the website. It's been very helpful, italki. I'm an active italki tutor. I teach Danish. Have had quite a few students now, and it's been very fun. And I'm actually looking into getting some Russian lessons to improve my speaking and listening. So if you know any Russian tutors on italki, or maybe you are one yourself who speaks a high level of English, that's very important to me as well, so they can explain it very clearly what they're trying to say sometimes. Of course I'd like most of it to be in Russian, but I need high level of English to explain those details. I'm not that good at Russian yet. But yeah, italki, you can find all kinds of tutors for every language in the world, I'm sure, and you pay very little for it. Usually you can find people at $10 or less per hour, which is very cheap for European countries. And if you're looking at countries where the currency isn't as strong, then you can find it even cheaper. So check out italki. You go to actualfluency.com, then you put in /italki, and that will bring you to the italki site, along with sort of my referral, so they can see that you came from me. And it's spelled Italki, italki. And I know there's some debate. Lindsay from Lindsay loves languages. Lindsay does languages, I think. She does love languages, truly. But Lindsay does languages, and she calls it I. And I've heard other people use that as well, but I just find that italki sounds better. I don't know. What do you prefer? Put it in the comments. But before I ramble on too much, again, I just want to say thank you for being here and listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. I'm doing it for your sake and mine as well. But here is the interview with Sonja Lang, the creator of Toki Pona. Enjoy. All right, on the show today, I'm excited to welcome Sonja Lang. Sonja is the creator of the constructed minimalist language Toki Pona, and she recently released the official Toki Pona book. So, Sonja, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
Fantastic. It's so exciting to talk to you, and we're definitely going to get into Toki Pona, obviously. But before we get into the Toki Pona topic, I'd just like to go back and talk about you for a second, because obviously a lot of people know who you are now that you've come to the Berlin Gathering and published the book. But maybe take a step back and talk about how you got started with languages. How did your fascination start, and any language history you might have had in the past?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a part of Canada called New Brunswick, which is officially bilingual. It's like one of the few parts of Canada where people actually speak French and English side by side in the same city. And I grew up in a family where I spoke to my father in English and spoke to my mother in French. So from a young age, I was always kind of aware that there were many languages out there and different, different ways of connecting with people and different ways of thinking and different cultures. And I think that's what made my curiosity begin.
Cool. And did you start? What was your first sort of language outside English and French you got into?
In high school, I had the chance to study Spanish, and that was very interesting to me. And also in high school, I started studying Esperanto, which is also a constructed language. And I was fairly young. I was probably like 15 or 16 when I became fluent in Esperanto.
Fantastic. And obviously that's possibly what led into the conlanging fascinating later on.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's funny because when I had heard about Esperanto, it was kind of like a joke. Like people were saying like, oh, there's this language that's the world language, but nobody speaks it. And I was like, oh, I have to learn this language now just to like make jokes about it. But then I realized, oh, actually people actually speak Esperanto. Like people actually go and travel, and like there's a connection, there's a community of people who travel with it. And it's strange. Like when you explore these different worlds, these different communities, like it's alive. Like there's people who do this thing,
Yeah, it's like a subculture. I feel almost Esperanto.
It's true, yeah.
You see that at the Polyglot Berlin Gathering we were both at. There were so many Esperanto speakers there, and obviously the event itself was based on a lot of Esperanto concepts. So I guess that was a place where you could maybe practice the old Esperanto a bit.
Exactly, yeah.
Ah, great. So you moved on from Esperanto in high school.
And in university, I got interested in sort of classics. Like I originally wanted to study like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs in university.
Oh, yeah.
But then I found a place that had Latin, and I was like, okay, that's good. Good classics, the foundation. So I did Latin for a year and German. And there's kind of a point when I realized that the German was more useful than the Latin, because it's like there's actually a country where people speak German today, and it's so I did like an exchange program with my university and lived in Germany for a year and had the opportunity to travel a bit. And I think that's like probably the year that started a lot of my sort of language. It made my language dreams sort of come true, because I had the chance to like meet people from lots of different places and practice these languages. And in my spare time as well, I found that like, learning Spanish and German and these languages, they're very similar to English and French. So I was looking for a challenge. And that's when I started like going like into more exotic languages and exploring like Finnish and Chinese and sign languages and things like that.
Incredible. So you were just kind of going into it for the kind of the exoticness of the languages.
Exactly, yeah, and as a kind of a challenge, because it's when you learn a language that's related to your own language, like in your case Danish and maybe German or Danish and Norwegian, like there's so many words that are similar, the structure is similar. Like it's I wanted to really kind of like challenge myself and almost like an anthropological adventure, go into a different, like a different time zone in a different country, a different world,
Yeah. So what kind of realizations or maybe surprises did you come to when you were exploring Finnish and Chinese, these very different languages from your own?
It's hard to answer. I mean, I think for me it was just like the it was kind of like an intellectual curiosity. Like I just wanted to see how language had grown, and how, I mean, it's difficult to separate language from culture, from civilization, from from beliefs and religions and history and identity. Like all these things are like very closely interconnected. So it's I don't know, it's the key to the humanities, in my opinion.
Yeah, to understand a human soul is through the language, isn't it? So
Yeah.
perfect. And so you got a degree in German, and what was the other one?
Yeah, my degree was in German and French, so kind of like like the literature, linguistics, that kind of thing. And I mean, that was like what I was doing by day, and then by night I was kind of just studying other languages and experimenting and poking at things and taking things apart and trying to invent new languages. And
well, I think a lot of people have that same kind of way of life where they study something at university. It could be linguistics, and then they go home and they study, ancient Greek or some other obscure language. So it's funny to talk to these people. I met a lot of them in Berlin as well. I mean, I find it really fascinating that, again, the subculture of wanting to know more than what is readily available. But that's when you started experimenting with creating your own. Is that when it started already?
I think so, yeah. I mean, when I was, I don't remember what age. Maybe I was like in my older teenage years, I had invented a language called Übener, which was kind of just like, I think it was influenced from Dadaism. There was, I think he was German, Kurt Schwitters, who like made all these weird sound poems with like bizarre sounds that, just throwing strange sounds together. Because when you think about it, like the languages we speak, they use like certain parts of the tongue and certain parts of the, our anatomy in certain ways. But like, you can explore and you can find like new sounds and new combinations and patterns. And so I think, I was kind of inspired by like a lot of this kind of Dada sound poetry stuff, and I was just putting together sounds for fun. And like language is a combination of sounds, but also like ways of structuring your thoughts. So it was sort of like a self-exploration type thing as well.
Oh, right. So you used it as a kind of a way of exploring your own kind of being.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's pretty deep. But that's a good thing, of course, and that you can kind of use. That you can make something of your own that helps you. I find that very strong. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a minute when we get to Toki Pona as well. But what did you do, just to kind of wrap up your own personal story? When you left university with the degree, did you go into traditional kind of working with the languages and maybe translating or communication in that kind of sense? Or did you go totally different?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I worked for a communications agency for a few years, doing like translation and working with media, like monitoring media and things like that. And eventually I went and worked for government, where various levels of government in Canada and just like in Europe, like there's official languages and sometimes documents need to be available in many languages. So that's, that requires translators, but not only translators, it requires people to kind of coordinate, the projects and like sort of project manager type people and coordinators and, this kind of stuff.
Sure.
I did some teaching for a while, like teaching French at an adult education center, like a community college. Mm-hmm. I worked in IT for a few years, like with email servers, kind of like doing the whole cybersecurity thing, like protecting your email server from hackers and this kind of stuff.
Cool.
I guess I just follow I follow inspiration and opportunity, and it's
great. And you said, we talked briefly before the interview, and you said that your language learning was on a bit of a, what would you call it, a hiatus maybe? It was a bit of a low priority for you right now. Is that something you're bringing back soon, or do you feel
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think there's a period, like I'm 35 right now, and like there's a period, like when you're a student, you have sort of like the opportunity to be more creative and wild and try things, and mm-hmm. I think when you reach like I don't know, there's like a stage in adulthood where your like priority becomes like, oh, I need to have a good job and I need to have money and all that kind of dream stuff, kind
grown-up stuff.
Yeah, grown up stuff. You gotta be responsible. So like that, put like, I mean, some of my hobbies, I guess I had to put on, as on a lower priority, right? So
but you want to maybe come back to that after you've established your life. You want to come back and maybe revive some of that.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, another opportunity I should mention that I'm really grateful about is, I guess it's connected to Esperanto as well, but there was like some projects where the Council of Europe was holding seminars, and it was between two groups. It was like an Esperanto youth group and a youth group that was involved with alternative, basically alcohol-free lifestyle where people like choose not to drink and still have fun. And because these two groups had different working languages, like one group was Esperanto as their language and the other group was English, they required conference interpreters. So I did a bit of work for the Council of Europe as a conference interpreter as well, where you kind of like just hide in the kind of like the aquarium at the back, and you just have like speakers, and you just have to repeat what everyone is saying, in both directions. So that was fun too. Yeah, that's like really fun.
It does sound exciting. I talked to a guy called Robert, who's also at the Berlin. He's kind of a full time in that field, or used to be anyway. And he also says it's a lot of fun, and he would do it. He speaks like 10 languages or something and does interpreting in 4. So it sounds exciting, definitely, to be. I guess you're in the action. It's happening now. You're not sitting with a piece of paper and a whole speech or something you can just kind of doze off at. But it's happening now. You have to respond. Again, I guess the stimulation, the intellectual challenge is again what's drawing you there, isn't it?
Yeah, and you have to be fast, and you have to be prepared for any topic, right? Like, I mean, if the conference, if people are talking about like whatever project management, or if they're talking about environmental science, or if they're talking about like whatever the topic has to be, like you have to know the language and you have to know the words for that in that field, right? So it's I don't know, it's fun.
A large vocabulary is required.
Yeah, exactly, and you have to have it quick, like because sometimes there's many languages that I've studied that if you told me like, okay, like read this ancient text, and you have all day, and I can be like, okay, no problem. I can, I've got dictionaries, I've got tools, I can take my time and do it properly. But when you're like live, you have to be prepared, you have to be, you have to roll with it.
You're on the spot.
Exactly.
Speaking of on the spot, you were at the Berlin Gathering. You're doing a talk on conlanging.
Yeah.
And how did you find the conference overall? Did you enjoy hanging out there and talking to people?
Yeah, it was really great. Like I knew the organizers, Judith and Chuck, from sort of like my Esperanto years back in the day when I was living in Europe, and they're still active. And I mean, I have a lot of respect for people who organize conferences, because it's easy to just show up as a participant, and but people do the hard work to organize and make sure that the money adds up, and people are registered and all that stuff. So so when I heard that they were doing that, and it coincided with me working on my Toki Pona book, because like basically I invented this language, Toki Pona, like when I was younger, and people have been telling me like, oh, we want to buy a book. So I'm like, okay, I gotta write a book. So when I finally got the time to put together a book, I was like, okay, I have to go out there and sort of tell the world that the book is out now.
Right.
So I chose that event to have basically like the book launch, like where the first copies of the book were available, and people could start a buzz, and people can start talking about it.
Excellent. And obviously there was a Toki Pona talk at the conference as well, so the buzz was definitely in the room. I could tell. It's probably the busiest talk in that room, with the TV crew there as well. The film students were in there as well, and poor Chris. He's my good friend. He must have felt a little bit pressure, having the creator of the language in the room, and then 100 people crammed into such a small space, and the TV camera and a huge microphone. But rumor has it he did very well. So
yeah, he did perfect. I mean, he did much better than I could ever do. I mean, that's it's strange. Like I was like, because they initially approached me and they said, why don't you, like Sonja, give a talk about Toki Pona, your language that you made? And I was like, no, I don't want to, because it's strange. But it's like, for me, I never made Toki Pona with the intention of like it being out there like for the world. It was just like my own private little thing that I did as part of my creative process. Just like an artist might be just writing on paper for fun and exploring themselves and sort of personal therapy or personal trying to understand the world. But I guess, the fact that the language is out there, people are using it, people are finding it interesting, it means that it has a certain value. So I have to,
Right.
I guess I have to accept that. I'm still struggling with that.
Well, that's good. That's great. I guess we can't really postpone talking about it anymore. We're so close that we're almost at the fence. But let's go back to creating Toki Pona. Like,
Sure.
you already I already said it was a minimalist constructed language, and you already just gave a little introduction. But if you had sort of, let's say, 30 seconds in an elevator or lift, depending on what country you're in, to kind of give the advantages or kind of the unique selling point of Toki Pona, how would you use those 30 seconds?
It's basically a pigeon. I mean, when people from different cultures, different civilizations come together, and they have to communicate. You want to focus on the simple things that everyone has in common. So, in the case of Toki Pona, one of my sort of goals was to make a language with 120 words. So very few words, and with those core words, you can express everything. That was the challenge.
How did you arrive at 120?
At first I didn't have any specific number. I was just trying to simplify concepts in my head. So, I mean, an example that I use is there's no word for teaching, for example, but there's a word for knowledge and there's a word for giving. So
Right.
A teacher is a person who gives knowledge. And so this kind of simplification process where you take ideas and then you kind of break them down into the most simple meanings that are within them.
Right.
That was the process for me. I just continued doing that until I had something that worked well with itself. And it was roughly 120 words. So I was like, that's it. This is what I got to do. And so I had to come up with the grammar and sounds and other things too, right? Like it's not just words.
Right. But so what you're saying is you didn't start with one word and then two, then three, and so on. You actually started with, let's say, a full working English vocabulary, and then you just said, well, this is really not needed. This is redundant. This isn't really needed. And then you had 120 left.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Because
I mean,
it's
close
the other way, ridiculously enough. But I'm not,
and it's
conlanging, but.
And for me, I mean, the language was kind of like a therapeutic kind of process. Like I was, I think I was going through depression, and I was trying to understand, what is life? What is, what are these deep things?
Right.
Why do we do this, or what? So, in this process, I was trying to let go of the extra things, like what you were saying, what is redundant, right? And,
right.
We were talking a bit. In Berlin, there was the author of another book who said that he travels and he has a certain limited number of kilograms that he just carries with him, right? And it's sometimes you have to simplify your life, and you have to purify and just let go of things that are not helping you and that you're just holding on to.
Yeah. I mean, I find this really amazing. I told you this as well, but the only question I had with that regard, and I'll repeat it now, and I invite you to repeat your answer as well because I really liked it.
Yeah.
Basically, my question was that if you're trying to find the meaning of life, which is the headline on your website or the official website, shouldn't the meaning of life be incredibly complex? As in, why is the language to find the meaning of life very simple?
That's a good question. I mean, and of course, the reality is there's no one answer, right? I mean, if you ask a theoretical particle physicist, physics expert, what's the meaning of life, and he'll have a whole bunch of formulas and try to show you what's going on with particle physics and cosmology and things like that.
Sure.
If you ask a religious person, they'll be like God. There you go, one word answer. Everything is God. God made it simple. And those are two extremes, right? But it's and different things define us, right? Like whether it's our relationship with people who are close to us, or whether it's the work that we do, or are able to connect with nature, or eating food, sleeping, like the activities that we do, like our habits. What do you do in a typical day? And then if I took that typical day, like what you do in one day, and repeat it like thousands of times, that's your life. That's what you do, and there's so many angles, right, to look at this. So, I mean, for me, inventing Toki Pona was my own angle, if you will. It was like my own personal way of approaching the problem.
Right. Cutting away the unnecessary and looking at the core.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, because if I had to create a con language, I would probably be like, well, my thoughts are so elaborate and crazy and complicated that I can't even explain them. So my language thus must be very complicated as well, have, 390 cases and 15 genders or whatever.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, it's tempting to do that too. Like, it's part of the fun of like, I mean, like there must be a word for every single thing.
Right,
and I mean, and I mean, if you talk to people of different languages, there's always these untranslatable words, right? Like where, like you were explaining how in Danish, there's this word that means something like a type of comfort and well-being that is just uniquely Danish, right? That's just, what is it?
Hygge.
Hygge, yes, and I mean, if you talk to like a Brazilian, they'll be like, oh, saudade, and like everyone has these words that are
the Finnish
very
you talked about as well.
Yeah. In Finnish, there's this concept of sisu, this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like this courage, this grit, this like this type of ability to endure what life throws at you, and I love learning about these things. But underlying all this, there's a common experience, right? Like we're all on the same planet. Sure. We're all basically human beings. So like, why is it that we've come up with all these different maps of how to understand reality?
Right. You said that Toki Pona is essentially a pigeon, and I from reading your book a little bit, I definitely had the same feeling from my linguistics 101 that I did one semester of. So I'm not an expert or anything, but isn't the idea of a pigeon that it's kind of a stage before it becomes a Creole and then sort of becomes a language? Do you feel like Toki Pona is evolving into something else, or was it always designed in a way that it should be a fixed kind of entity?
That's like a very good question. It's actually a question I don't have the answer to. Because I mean, when I first sort of published Toki Pona on the internet, like I think it was 2001, I didn't even realize that the language like sort of was becoming more popular. Like it was something that I sort of did for fun, and like there was like a little chat room, and I was talking to some people who sort of were the early adopters of the language, I guess. And but I mean, I'm a bit out of touch. Like I'm not really active in all the different Toki Pona things that are going on out there, right? So it's in my absence, the language, of course, like you say, like it evolves. People use it in certain ways, and like I don't have control over that, and I don't want control over that. Like it's just kind of its own.
Okay.
It's like music, right? Like I mean, a musician can make art, and then it might become like popular, or people might sample it and reuse parts of it and make a new song, and that's part of the beauty, I guess.
Right. When did you first kind of realize that there's quite a few people doing this?
Maybe like 1 or 2 years, I guess, after I first created it. I realized that like, this is catching on. And I think part of its popularity is the simplicity, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people are like, hey, I want to learn another language, but who has time, right? Like I like learning Arabic or Chinese, like that's going to take a few years. But Toki Pona is like, I've got a weekend. I can just, learn a new language over the weekend.
Yeah. How many pages was the book? Was it about 80 or something?
The book is 134 pages.
Right.
I'm just holding it in my hand here. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the and make no mistake, that is the guide. That is your kind of entire walkthrough of Toki Pona.
Pretty much. I mean, and that's I put in my preface because I, like when you create sort of the underlying book that, like, I mean, like I said, like this is basically. Let me read from the preface here. I've got in this book, I hope to present the language in its completed form. I hope to present the language in its completed form. This is the way I use Toki Pona. So that's my little like.
Right.
disclaimer. Like this is, I mean, who am I? I'm the person who invented this language, and this is how I use the language. But go ahead and do what you want, right? Like I've like at the very very end of the book, like at the final lesson, like there's kind of the book has like lessons, dictionaries, little comic books, and things like that. But the final lesson basically says, now the rest depends on you. Go, enjoy yourself, create, play, and be Pona. So It's kind of like an invitation for you to do what you want, with the language now that you have seen how I use it.
Right. The thing I find interesting is that you decided where you kept going down to 120 words or thereabouts, and then you're like, well, I don't really know how it's going to evolve, but surely adding words to Toki Pona would be kind of against the original purpose, wouldn't it?
That's true, yeah. And it's a constant struggle even for myself. I mean, like there's days where I'm like, oh, we should totally have a word for like vehicle, and then you can, from that concept of vehicle, you could like, make
lots of things.
Like for a long time there were people saying like, oh, we should have a word for brother or sister, because it's like a type of fellowship, like when two brothers or a brother and a sister are together. It's like and it's challenging because I mean the more you say no, we can't have that word, but we're going to simplify it. So instead of brother, we have a word for person, and then the word sama, which means same, also means like same generation or same category.
Okay.
So it turns out like the word for brother or sister, sibling, is the same word as the word for peer, like someone who's the same as you.
Socially equal.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's what I did. But I mean, of course, you could have a word for brother, and of course, you could have a word. I mean, it's very subjective, right? And the more abstract you go, like if you take it to its extreme, like it becomes a type of binary where it's like we have no ideas whatsoever. Everything is just ones and zeros, and it's just. And if you put the ones and zeros in this combination, then of course that means airplane. Like that's obvious.
Right.
Like, but
it's really fascinating. I'm sure that it's probably it's a study of many linguists looking at how does it happen in in a natural setting. I remember reading about the Papua New Guinea pigeon, which is great, like helicopter, something like air fly Jesus or something, or Jesus fly fly or something, and it's really incredible. I guess what would be interesting with Toki Pona going forward is that it was created. So how is it going to kind of develop compared to the pigeons that were naturally sort of came from other languages, but you don't seem to have any kind of, you don't seem to be sort of afraid of any changes because it's different from what you created. You kind of just saying, well, this is how I created it. You can use it to however you feel is correct.
That's my attitude basically. And I mean, in the end, I mean, the if people want to buy the book, I mean, people are going to make other things creatively with it. But at the end of the day, I can say, well, I made it. Here's the official book. And, if you want to support me as an artist, you can buy a copy of the book. But if you want to go and use it for whatever you want, like, please, like, that's the whole point, right? Like it's a language is not just something that's in a book. It's something that's alive and that you can use. And otherwise,
Right. What was your experience, speaking about alive, what was your experience speaking it at Berlin? Did you get a chance to speak to anyone?
Yeah. Many people approached me in Berlin speaking in Toki Pona, and I replied in Toki Pona, and it was kind of fun. And there were people there who have been using Toki Pona for like 10 years who were there.
Right.
It's strange. Like the language it's been around for long enough that it has a bit of history. Like even the book, like there's one of the early speakers of Toki Pona, Rick Miller, who's now passed away. He's dead, and so like I dedicated the book to his memory.
Oh wow!
But it's like our community has like history. It's strange.
Great. Well, but you were talking about conlanging in general at the Berlin gathering, and I was catching kind of the tail end of that. It was kind of a discussion, I guess. It was kind of like a collaboration. You were trying to make your own con language in that little room. Did you call it room 3 lang or something silly like that?
Yeah, it was basically like for fun. just to sort of show how the process works. Like, well, here's the sounds we have. Here are the ideas. Here are the grammatical options. Like, let's make a language, in half an hour.
Right. And it looked like a lot of fun. What would have...
Excuse me.
No problem. When you compared creating Toki Pona that long time ago and then kind of, I mean, it wasn't really that serious, but if you had to create a new language now, would it be vastly different from when you first created Toki Pona? Have you learned anything from that experience, or do you feel like you would probably approach it similarly?
The approach might be similar. I mean, but it really depends on the situation. I mean, like in the case of Toki Pona, it was kind of like trying to create a simple language using universal kind of archetypes and ideas and things that every language has in common, which inspired me. But I mean, if another case where constructed languages are popular is with like things like science fiction and fantasy, where you have like a creator who, is writing a novel or making like a TV series or a movie, and they want, their little aliens or whatever their people to have like their own language, like like Klingon or Avatar or Dothraki or one of these kinds of languages. So I mean, if I was designing a language for a TV show, I mean, of course that would be completely different, and it would be understanding the setting and understanding the the way of thinking of this culture and the life kind of. The language that's created is an authentic language that can be studied and is a real language, but it puts to life their sort of the common identity of these people.
Right, and then you wouldn't have to be constrained to, let's say, a minimalist approach. Then you could actually just say, well, it could be as redundant as I want, if that's the kind of the cultural
exactly
idea.
Yeah.
Excellent. Has there been any changes in the Toki Pona since from the first version to, well, maybe not the first version, but the first time you said, okay, it's pretty done now, to up to until now?
Yeah, I mean, there have been. There's in the beginning, I was kind of like listening to everybody's feedback, where people are saying, no, you should do this. No, you should totally not do that. And like everyone has an opinion, right? Sure. Like where they want to participate in the process. And in the beginning, I was kind of listening to everything. And so, for example, some people said that like there's a word ala, which means nothing. And then there's a word ale, which means everything. And some people were saying, oh, that's too similar, like we should change it to Ali. And I was like, okay, that's fair, so Ali is not a word. So I just decided that Ali would be like a synonym to ale. You could use either one and it would mean the same thing. Like just how in English you can say either or either, it's the same word, they're both acceptable. Okay. So I did a few things like that where there is sort of some variation and it's acceptable. Like you can use this form or that form and they mean the same thing.
Right.
So that's like an example of change.
Did you add anything that you had kind of forgotten in the first rendition that you were like, oh, damn, I should have put a word in for this?
Not that I can think of. I mean, I added there's a few words that were more recent, like in the beginning, like Toki Pona was kind of inspired by like the hunter-gatherer kind of primitive lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So, the words for food reflected that. Like there was a word for like animal. And so if you were like eating animal or eating a bird, like you would directly just eat the animal or the bird.
Sure.
And then I thought, okay, we need to add agriculture now, like this is like civilization has moved beyond hunter-gatherers. We need to like grow our own food. So I added a word pan, which means like a cereal or a grain. So something like wheat or rice or bread, or macaroni or whatever, like anything that's in that kind of category.
Pretty flexible vocabulary.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun, like it's each word has so many different meanings, but they're all related. So it's not, I mean, some of them are a bit of a stretch, but it's part of the exercise, it's part of the fun.
And that's kind of the charm as well. But is it ever a struggle for the when you're communicating in Toki Pona that sometimes it's a bit too ambiguous for understanding?
A little bit. I mean, the whole idea was, part of the spiritual element of Toki Pona for me was always about being present, like in the present moment, in the present context. So if you're talking about like a grain or cereal or rice or wheat or something like that, and you're in the room with someone, or you're in the field with someone, it's clear like what you're talking about, right? It's not an abstract thing like, oh, which of the 12 grains are you talking about? Like, it's impossible to know. Oh no, like it's not going to change your life. Like if you're, likewise the word for like fruit and vegetable, it's the same word. And so, I mean, if you're hungry and you get a potato or you get a banana, like, you should just be happy and eat your potato and,
Right.
it's, so, I mean, it's part of the philosophy of the language is that, this kind of minimalism is good for us. Not, sometimes it's better to just accept things as they are instead of trying to find more ways to make them complicated.
Right, but you're not struggling for words when you're speaking it to, for instance, Job, who's very very good. I think. You're not struggling sometimes for like, how can I say this? It's not a problem.
I don't struggle. I mean, but it depends. I mean, like if for everyday situations and, friendship and exploring your thoughts and, prayer and, working together, like these kinds of situations, Toki Pona, it works, for creative projects and stuff. But if you're trying to, I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised all the time. Like I always thought that like Toki Pona could not be used in like for like a legal contract, like, oh, that's too complicated.
Right.
But there's two guys who did it. Like there's an artist who wrote like a legal contract that is selling the contract itself to another guy, and he wrote it in like Toki Pona hieroglyphs, and it's like people are proving me wrong all the time. So what do I know? I'm just
that's really incredible.
I was just there in the beginning. That's it.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you have an amazing community around it.
It's fun. Yeah, it's
all right. So what kind of we talked about what kind of evolution I suppose that the language would undergo naturally, but do you have any sort of wishes or maybe even ideas that you'd like to do with the language going forward, or are you like, well, I've done my part, now all that's left is the language can be spoken and enjoyed and done with what you please?
That's a good question. I mean, at some point, if it becomes very serious that people really want to know, like I try to respond to the needs of the people, but at the same time, I try to remember that Toki Pona was just my own little language to begin with, right? So it's I didn't do it for others in the beginning, but it's become a thing that others feel involved with it. So I don't know. I guess there's been a lot of really good people in the Toki Pona community. There's like Matthew Martin has been doing a lot of really good work at trying to standardize things and provide some type of governance to the language usage. And there's people like Joop that you mentioned. He's like been there from the beginning at administering like the like moderating the discussion groups and things like that. So it's I think my part is kind of done. Like I think it's best if other people carry the torch of Toki Pona, because it's more strength if it's not coming from me, if it's coming from people who believe in Toki Pona and want to use it for whatever purpose they want to use it for.
Right, but at the same time, if they see you on the street or they happen to know your email address, they're welcome to send you a
of course.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm almost done with the questions I had, but there was just one thing I was wondering, because I'm not into conlang at all. I don't know anything about it, so maybe if we shouldn't probably get into too much detail. But if you had to give like one advice, your number one best tip for somebody who was maybe already devising a con language of their own, or maybe wanted to get into it, what would be the kind of the tip, the thing you wish you would have been told before you went into devising your con language?
That's a good question. It would depend on their situation. I guess I would ask them like what their motivations are. Like, do you want to create a language that has a community? Do you want to create a language for, a specific fantasy sci-fi world? Do you want to create some like a philosophical type of language to kind of organize your thoughts? And, I guess I would start asking these kinds of questions, like what are your goals? What are your motivations? And try to guide them from there,
So in another way, it's important not to kind of start designing the language on a whim. You kind of need to get all your
I think
whys
so.
and
Yeah.
hows in
Yeah.
place
But then
for
again,
us.
sometimes these creative things just come out of their own as well too. So it's hard to say. I wish I had the magic answer for you.
Well, I thought you provided a very good answer. And indeed, all your answers have been very good, and it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, not just in Berlin and here, but also on Skype. And I'm looking forward to see more
Thank you.
in the future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Toki Pona.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.